Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter of my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story, and I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who have written such complimentary comments below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of my life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994.
Fred and I had made our honeymoon plans together. Since both Nicolette and Diana had chosen a place called Paradise Island off the coast of Mozambique for theirs and had enjoyed it, I suggested Mozambique. They say it's absolutely beautiful with coral reefs, crystal clear blue ocean, and the island is so small that it only has one tiny hotel on it. I'd enthused. Robin, Nicolette's husband, says he'll lend us his inflatable rubber dinghy and spear gun too, and the fishing is fantastic. That did it for Fred. Fishing was one of his greatest passions, the best times of his tumultuous life, having been sent off Treboy's prep boarding school at the tender age of 5, and then Eton straight afterwards, had been any escape with a fishing rod and waders. He'd survived the horrors of holidays at home and life with his parents in general by happily casting for trout and salmon on the lochs at Oban and Glencruton. His love for fishing had taken him overland in an ancient car with some Cambridge friends. From England to the mountains of Chitral, then India, now Pakistan, on 2 separate occasions, spending a fishing holiday with an old school friend from Eton, who'd invited him to come over and fish any time, and who'd turned out to be an Indian prince. Fred and his Cambridge mates had spent many glorious weeks exploring all the best fly fishing facilities in those rugged mountains, sometimes camping out for several days, courtesy of the prince, who lent him his jeep and some servants to set up camp and cook for them. Yes, if the idea of good fishing could attract Fred to drive overland to India and back, and then repeat the journey, you could say he was a keen fisherman. I'd spent all my own life trout fishing in the river with Grandpa from the fort, my father's father, and estuary fishing from Grandpa Southey, my mother's father. His old wooden rowing boat on the Nyson Lagoon on the Eastern Cape Coast garden route, using mud prawns we'd collected ourselves for bait. And I was a keen fisherman too. Would you mind spending a 2-week honeymoon on a fishing trip on some remote island? He'd asked me in amazement. I couldn't think of anything better, I'd exclaimed. I adore fishing, and Robin says we can go out on the marlin boats they hire out, and we could even try and catch a sailfish. Apparently, Dinah says the island hotel food's pretty ropey, and she suggested we take essentials such as bovril, English mustard, and our own mayonnaise, as the Portuguese food can taste pretty awful. But she did add that the kitchen staff are happy to cook all the fish we catch. I don't care too much about the food. It can't be as bad as school food was his reply. So we decided to treat ourselves to one night's luxury at the Carlton Hotel in the middle of Hillbrow in Joburg. It was the fanciest and most expensive hotel, as it was in the best part of the city, center of the business district, where diamond and gold magnates stayed on business trips. I already knew the Carlton quite well, as that's where Andy, a childhood friend of mine's mother, used to drop us off to enjoy a fine dinner, just the two of us, me aged 13 and Andy 11. And I'd continued regularly to enjoy that particular hotel's top restaurant fare for the best part of 8 years. Fred had blanched when, on booking our single night in the honeymoon suite, was told the cost. But it then worked out that the price of 2 weeks in the hotel on Paradise Island, plus getting there and back, would come to slightly less than that one night at the Carlton. My canny Scottish husband felt quite relieved that I was perfectly happy to spend only one solitary night of such expensive luxury and not demand 2 weeks there. So we were both delighted with the choice and had gone over to Durban North to pick up Robin's boat, which was strapped up in a large rubber bag to form a neat parcel, complete with a long wooden double-bladed paddle tied to the straps, and his even longer, powerful, state-of-the-art spear gun. We'd stored all the gear in the little house we'd just recently rented in the Montclair area in Durban South, because as much as I loved Fred's flat overlooking the yacht basin, it was most definitely a bachelor flat, and in spite of its spectacular views, the only bedroom was so small we wouldn't be able to squeeze a double bed in there, and had been sharing Fred's single one for nearly the past year. The Victoria Embankment, attractive as it was with its huge old coconut trees planted all along the grassy centre meridian in Queen Victoria's time, and lush green lawns, shrubs and parks leading right down to the water's edge, was becoming substantially busier. We were often woken by the rumbling of huge pantechnicons thundering down to the wharfs where the sugar terminals lay, and police and ambulance sirens wailing past. It was just too noisy for us now, and we'd looked for somewhere quieter with some sort of garden we could sit in. Our new home was the bottom half of a pleasantly airy and spacious double-story house, perched halfway up the hillside, with a clear view of Durban Harbour, including the bluff, where Fred's new job was as the chief civil engineer in charge of the bridge at the new container docks. The suburb wasn't nearly as smart as Durban North, where both my older sisters lived in their own homes, complete with servants' quarters and large gardens with swimming pools. As Dad was quick to point out, but nor was it as expensive to rent here. It was quiet and very convenient for Fred to nip down the hill to work, as it would have been a nightmare commute for him to have to cut across the flow of busy rush hour traffic if we'd chosen Durban North. His job was in South Durban and mine was in the city centre, which was equidistant to either side of the city, but had an abysmal bus service for both. Previously, I'd been able to walk there to my office from Fred's flat, as it was only 3 blocks away, which had been most convenient. I'd have to tackle my commuting problems later on, after we came back from Mozambique. Our new home had all the access to both the front and back gardens. Although tiny, the back garden was completely enclosed by very high whitewashed brick walls and had the traditional Durban garden selection of lemon, orange, banana, pawpaw, mango, banana and avocado trees, all of which bore plenty of fruit, far more than we could eat, and provided deep, cool shade and complete privacy, perfect for outdoor braais and entertaining our friends. Even on the most blisteringly hot or windy days, we could sit out there in the cool tranquility of our sheltered little garden and enjoy a braai. The couple who owned the house were elderly, by my standards anyway, but were probably in their mid-50s and had cleverly subdivided the house so that we had a big, high-ceilinged sitting room, a similar bedroom, both of which looked onto the front garden and the little street, which bore the minimum of slow, oh, stop it, I can't say it, slow, local traffic. We had big bay windows in our 2 front rooms, which faced south, the coolest side of the house, and we came and went through the front door. We had a small kitchen and perfectly adequate bathroom with a separate loo, which looked out to our secluded back garden. Our bathtub was the huge old-fashioned type, which stood on ball and claw feet, and we could bath together with plenty of room to spare, which we often did. Our landlady and her husband used a little path down the right side of the house, which led to a side entrance and gave them private access to their part of the house through that door, which led straight upstairs to what must have been an identical setup there. In all our time living there, we must have seen them perhaps twice, and only a glimpse at that, as one or the other gave us a cheerful wave as we all went about our separate business. He was a lecturer at the University of Durban, which was just up the road from us, and she was the editor of a well-known national women's magazine, and they were both out all day. With the nice thick wall and their substantially sturdy and well-carpeted floor, which was our ceiling, we were completely unaware of their presence. Them, too, we were ideal tenants, as we both went out to work every morning, and when we entertained, it was only a weekend braai with up to 4 of our closest friends, as we preferred it that way. I had already asked and received permission to get a pair of rescue kittens from the SPCA once we settled in, as the back garden would be a perfect haven for them, with all those lovely big trees to play in and nowhere to get out over the high walls. There was no way they could get to the road in front of the house either, and even if one managed to sneak out somehow through the front door, the road was almost never used except for our own comings and goings. Parked my Minnie and Fred's Cortina, which his parents had borrowed to come back from the wedding, in the road next to our landlord's own cars, where they were perfectly safe. After finally having extricated ourselves from the traffic jam on our wedding day outside Maritzburg, we shot over to our new home and ordered a taxi, into which we loaded our 2 modestly small cases and the packed-up dinghy, paddles and spear gun, which we'd left in the sitting room next to the front door, and told the Indian driver to drive as fast as he could to the airport, which was a little further down the south coast. We'd rung the airline from our house to ask if we could go on standby for the next flight to Joburg, which left in 2 hours. Our original flight was taking off as I was on the phone, and the desk attendant said we could if we got there early enough. Once we were at the airline information desk, we explained our plight. Yes, there were 2 seats left on the next flight out at 6 o'clock, but we'd have to stand at the very back of the queue when we got to the departures gate, so as to allow the pre-booked passengers to be seated first. So it was with great relief that we sank into some seats in the departures area after having checked our luggage in. Then I heard it, a familiar, loud, hoarse voice talking very loudly. I looked over to the boarding gate and saw a tartan-clad figure. Oh my God, it's your parents, I hissed to Fred. Keep your head down, for heaven's sake, before they see us. I just remembered that they were flying out via Joburg that same afternoon, and by the sheer bad luck of our missing our original flight, we were now going to be on the same plane as they were. Oh dear God, muttered Fred, as he ducked down, trying to fold his 6'2" frame into the fetal position. I don't believe it. Let's just hope they board now, quickly, and we can sneak on last and sit at the very front of the plane where they won't see us. On internal flights like the service between Durban and Joburg, there was only the 1 class. Otherwise, we might have been lucky. Ba and Bob always travelled first class, and we wouldn't see them at all. But somehow Ba had spotted us, although we were both crouched as low as possible, with our heads right down, faces buried in the magazines we'd bought for the hour-long flight. Darlings, croaked Ba at the top of her hoarse voice, and she began shoving her way back through the queue of about 150 passengers, standing patiently waiting to board, her long and voluminous tartan kilt knocking people's hand luggage out of their grasps, and her tartan sash flapped in their faces as they bent to retrieve dropped boarding passes, passports, and other valuable items, glaring furiously at her as she bulldozed by. Bob remained at his station at the very front of the queue. Darlings, she rasped again as she threw her arms around a scarlet-faced Fred. I didn't know you were on the same plane as us. You have to sit with us. Fred explained that we'd missed our own flight and had managed to squeeze into the last 2 precious seats on this one. but had been instructed to board last and sit wherever we were allocated. "Oh, nonsense, darling," she bellowed, and to our horror grabbed Fred's arm and began dragging him back past all the now outraged passengers to the very front of the queue, where Bob stood complacently. "We can't just butt into the front of the queue," spluttered Fred, aghast. "Not right. And we really can't risk annoying the airline staff by queue jumping. We had to beg for these seats." But he might as well have been talking to the air, as she ignored him completely, and, oblivious to the now openly ominous mutterings and remarks about how rude and shocking behaviour from some people, she planted herself back at the front next to Bob, her bony, wizened hand still tightly gripped around Fred's elbow. He looked helplessly back at me, trying to signal something with his eyes, perhaps to call an official and try and restore some sort of order or calm among the clearly and justifiably mutinous crowd of irate, legitimate passengers. There were a lot of them, and they were very angry. I looked frantically around, but could see nobody in uniform, and by now the airline staff had opened the gate and were holding Bob's boarding pass, about to tear off the stub. So there was nothing I could do other than grab my own hand luggage and scurry quickly through the throng, head down, trying not to attract even the more well-deserved abuse and curses, to join my husband before he was whisked off completely by his overbearing mother, and be forced to sit by myself on the plane all the way to Joburg. So we sat together in a group of 4 and were forced to listen to Bar and Bob's loud and inane drunken babbling as they sang vast quantities of cane spirit mixed with orange juice. We didn't dare lift our heads to look around us, as we were surrounded by disgruntled, hostile fellow passengers who clearly blamed us for the appalling display of sheer bad manners exhibited by my new in-laws. To make matters worse, someone had been sick and it had vomited over the back of the seat right in front of mine, and the cleaning staff had done a very inadequate job of cleaning it up. I had the choice of looking around, my nose well away from the stench of sick, but attracting angry glares from my neighbours, or keeping my head down and nearly gagging on the smell of vomit, something I've never been able to bear. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for listening. I don't know if you want to hear about our honeymoon in Paradise Island. Let me know if you do, if you just want to continue this saga. And if you want, I will also take you to Scotland to live in the castle with Bar and Bob. Just keep your comments honest. If you're sick of this, we'll try something else. If we want to continue, I can tell you about Mozambique before, just 2 years before the Civil War started, when it was at its best. Goodbye for now. Many thanks to John Moslane for being my sound engineer on this broadcast, and see you next week.
That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.